Where did you find the patients that are in your book?
A couple of different ways. I found a bunch of them at the cancer conferences because, well, at the cancer conferences, some of them I just found online. Some of them I found through doctors who I talked to. For example, in addition to the 20 stories, there were 5 doctors who I interviewed who are cutting edge and
Oh,
who
that
are
was
saving lives.
fabulous. Sorry, that was
So they were
awesome.
great resources too. About sure, I'd be happy to open the door to this particular patient or that particular patient. But there's a ton of them out there. We don't hear those stories enough about all the great successes. And regarding that, it's interesting. I sometimes said to these cancer survivors, I like to call them thrivers with a
Yes,
TH, thrivers,
thrivers.
not survivors,
That's
because they're
right.
living life. I said, did you ever go back to that doctor who said you should get your affairs in order? And a lot of them said, some of them said, I'm so disgusted with that doctor. I don't care if I ever see him or her again. Some of them went back and the doctor said, I'm here. It's 10 years later. And you said, I was going to be gone in 6 months. And sometimes the doctor would look at the patient like they saw a ghost, like, oh my God, I'm still here, literally. And the doctor said, and this really disgusted me, the doctor said, you're just lucky. He
Ugh.
didn't want to know what the patient even did to alter their biochemistry to stop the progression of the cancer. They just said, "Oh, you're lucky." He didn't want to delve beyond their narrow world of strictly standard of care and understand that maybe other things contributed to this wonderful outcome of living life many, many years later.
Wow. That's pretty sad.
It is sad.
Yeah.
It is sad. There's a closed-minded perspective. You have these two polarized camps of it's opening up a little bit, but you've got very, very strict standard of care people, and you have some very strict alternative people,
Mm-hmm.
but there's a lot of gray area in between,
Mm-hmm.
and they should really talk to each other. For example, even in major cancer centers, you sometimes have an integrative department where you might have 1 or 2 open-minded doctors, you might have 1 or 2 naturopaths, but what you see in some of these integrative centers, these integrative departments in the major cancer centers, is not what I call comprehensive, sophisticated integrative care. They might say, okay, you can go down the hall and get a massage. You can go down the hall, we'll do a little acupuncture, which is good, but I'll give you a little bit of vitamin D3. But it's not a sophisticated approach, a personalized approach. And that's really where you're going to get great benefit, not just through some of this token stuff that I think they do just to satisfy the public who says, I heard integrative is good. Oh, we now have integrative. Well, it's not a sophisticated, comprehensive, multifaceted approach, which we should have.
Absolutely. I completely agree. And with your thrivers, were there any commonalities?
Yes, absolutely. There were people, mindset was really important. You mentioned attitude before, but mindset is really, really important. Again, if you go into a cancer diagnosis and it stays with you that, oh my gosh, this is the end of the world, it's going to be tough to climb out of that hole and fight this thing with the appropriate mindset. So, attitude and mindset are really key. Knowing that you are not a statistic. Think about it. When doctors give you a prognosis, a dire prediction, say you've got 1 year to live, and if you believe that, not a good thing. Remember, though, you are an individual. You are not a statistic.
Yes.
What you do after you get a prognosis, a dire prognosis, is paramountly important because some people, again, they put their head under a pillow and they just go down the drain.
Mm-hmm.
Other people say there's got to be stuff on the cutting edge. There has to be certain evolving treatments or therapies. There has to be other things that work for people that's not part of straight standard of care. We need to rethink this. So if you reach out and seek out practitioners who are on the cutting edge, who are highly respected, your outcomes might be tremendously different. But you have to have the courage or at least the proactive attitude to go seek those out and research them, but seek them out. So, according to, for example, an oncologist told me once this. He said, according to oncology, conventional oncology, stage 4 means it's incurable. So when we hear the word incurable, we're thinking, oh my gosh, I'm a goner. But as he said that's pursuant to conventional standard of care medicine. Meaning, when you bring other things to the table, again, evidence-based, proven, that you can alter the disease process. You can frequently slow the progression or stop the cancer where you can just control it so it doesn't metastasize anymore, or push it backwards to the extent where maybe you have scans a year from now or 2 years after you bring in the complementary therapies, and you'll have what's called NED, no evidence of disease, NED, where someone will say you're cancer free. Now, cancer free doesn't mean you don't have cancer, but they don't see it diagnostically. So attitude is big time important. Also compliance, I should say that. Compliance and adherence to the protocol. A lot of people will be given a protocol, and sometimes the complementary therapies and treatments are not easy to follow. I mean, you've got to make massive changes in your habits, your lifestyle habits. In terms of, I'll just go with nutrition for a second. What you eat, forget about McDonald's now. Forget about those milkshakes. Forget about those chocolate chip cookies every afternoon. You've got to change your internal biochemistry, and food is a great way to do it. So compliance to the multifaceted approach is really important, including attitude. So, these things, by making the changes, can save lives.
100%. As a cancer coach, one of the first things I tell somebody when they get diagnosed is to not go to the internet. Do not go to the internet, because there are so many statistics, and you are specific. You have your cancer. It's personal and it's specific to only you. My doctor, my first oncologist, I had two, she told me that I had a 50% of living. I'm like, what? She's like, oh no, that's good. I'm like, that is not good. Like, hearing that, Rick, I was like, I was like 50-50. I didn't accept that. That's another thing, is that we are raised to listen to our doctors, to accept what they say, to believe it. So we're not supposed to push back. For the people that do like reach inside themselves and say, hey, wait a minute, the ones that you're talking about that seek, alternative methods of healing, or maybe they don't care for their doctor, to stand up and they make a change. That's great. But there's so many people. I'll say, well, why didn't you do this, or why didn't you do that? Well, that's what my doctor told me to do.
That's true. It's very hard when a doctor says, this is what you must do. You've got to start chemo on Tuesday. Or if they say something like, oh, nutritional changes are nonsense, they won't help you at all, or supplementation is a bunch of garbage. It's hard because they have the white coat, the stethoscope, and all these years of medical training, and the peer pressure that you face. It's tough to make independent decisions independent of their opinions.
Right. Yeah, it's so true. And with your thrivers, were there any differences between them?
Well, in terms of the kinds of things they brought to the table, there were commonalities and differences. Some of them would bring to the table, a nutritional approach. There was one, for example, who went to a doctor in the LA area, actually Long Beach, and she did not make any changes really nutritionally, supplementation, exercise, or even mind body, except she was a real fighter. She found a doctor. He wrote a chapter in the book. His name was Dr. Robert McGurney. He's down in Long Beach, and he has a unique way of selecting the type of chemotherapy you should use. And what she did was she had gone to a couple of hospitals. She had chemo with one hospital, chemo with another. She had ovarian cancer. It had spread to the stomach and other areas. And she was not doing well. She was losing a ton of weight, and she was regressing terribly. So he said, let me take a look at your tissue sample. He took a 1 gram sample of her actually he took her what's called her ascites, and it was liquid from the ovarian cancer with lots of malignancies in the liquid. And he tested it against 15 different types of chemo, different combinations. We found one that worked. And he put her on this chemotherapeutic approach, which had nothing to do with ovarian cancer, but it worked because he tested it in his laboratory. And as a result, That was in 1999 when she was told in October of 1999, you've got 2 months to live, or you won't make it till Christmas.
Oh, oh,
And she flew to 6 cancer centers throughout the country. Think of your most famous cancer centers. She was there. And then when she went back years later to a couple of the centers, because she told me she did, and by the way, she is also a former medical doctor and a PhD. She
right,
went back and they said, "You're lucky." They didn't even ask what she did. They said, "You're lucky." But Nagurney and another doctor in Southern California, a guy named Dr. Wiesenthal, who's in Orange County, are the only two people I know of in North America who do this what's called chemosensitivity test, where they test your actual tissue sample against a whole variety of chemos to see what works best with your particular cancer. Not something that conventional medicine grabs from off the shelf and says, "Oh, well, this is what we use for pancreatic cancer.
right. Yeah,
This is what we use for triple negative breast cancer." It's customized to you based on testing your tissue sample, your malignancy sample against a whole combination. So that's something that she did, and she actually did not partake of other complementary things, but it was a very different type of chemo approach. Some people just did nutritional. Some people did a tremendous amount of supplementation. But the four things that people used across the board most of the time were making nutritional oncological changes, eating really, really healthy food, staying away from animal protein, and if they did, just making that just a small portion of their meal, making
mm-hmm.
sure it wasn't factory infused, with all kinds of chemicals and antibiotics and hormones,
Right,
and organic vegetables and fruit. So, and on the supplementation area, they would also include supplements that would work based on science. Also, they would work with mind-body approaches, and we can talk about that if you like in a few minutes. And then exercise too. Everybody can exercise. Think about it. Even if you're in a wheelchair, take those 2 cans of Campbell's soup. Don't
yeah.
drink them. Don't eat them, but use them like this every day, and get oxygen-rich blood into your system. It reduces nausea. It helps you sleep better. It helps ultimately reduce fatigue because it'll build up your endurance. But exercise never hurts anyone, no matter what your issue is. So those four things are really foundational.
Yeah,
Supplements, exercise, and mind body. Yeah.
I do a cancer centric workout Wednesday, and I have cans. Not that I don't eat from them, but they're beans, and I'm like, if you don't have anything, just use your cans. Just you can don't have to have anything, but you don't want to use weights. It's perfect. What do you think
Right.
about people who say that organic food is not really organic? They're just charging more. I mean, there are people that push back when I say, oh, you should only eat organic. What are your thoughts on that?
I think it's wise, and there are studies to support what I'm about to say, that organic food versus food that's infused with insecticides, herbicides, pesticides, all kinds of chemicals, GMO foods. I think it's a smart thing to do. Now, having said that, you can have an organic field next to a conventional field that has lots of pesticides, and the wind could blow pesticides into the organic field. So is it going to be pure organic? It's hard to say. Are there
Right.
charlatans out there who sell organic? They call it organic, and it's not. Well, there's supposed to be certain tests that they have to go through before they can
Right.
label it organic. If you see it in Sprouts or Whole Foods and it says organic, it probably is. But I think it's a smart thing to do. It's hard to convince people who are just naysayers and just say, "Oh, I don't believe it makes any difference." You know, it's like, I mean, I like chocolate chip cookies. They taste real good. They taste better than certain other foods that are healthier for you, but you can pay the piper now or later. I mean, it's going to cost you one way or the other in terms of your health, and you've got to make a decision for your own life. But I think organic's smart.
Me too. I when they said that, well, I said I'm not willing to take that chance. I want to eat organic because I'm not willing to take the chance. And I feel
Right.
like it's going to serve me. I choose to believe that it is organic and that they truly are growing and harvesting, organic foods for us to eat.
If you can afford to do it, go
If
organic.
you can afford it, yes.
Yeah, and if you can't go with, there are certain vegetables as well. I can't name them to you on this podcast right now, but there are certain vegetables that you don't have to worry about in terms of organic versus non-organic as much because the so-called pesticides don't get into the inner core of the fruit or the vegetable. but there are others that you really want to go organic with. And you can find that out on the internet, which are the best vegetables and fruit to go with organically and which ones do you not have to worry about as much. But organic is the way to go if you can do it.
Absolutely. Are there safe and effective cancer treatments that are not part of the conventional standard of care?
Yeah, I mean, all the things we've been talking about. Nutritional approaches, obviously safe, and you're not going to get hurt by them, and they can be profoundly beneficial. Supplementation is an interesting area because you can buy supplements everywhere now. You can buy them at Costco, you can buy them at the local supermarket, you can buy them at Walmart,
You
anywhere
can
you
buy them
go.
at Walmart. Yeah, you can buy them anywhere.
But you want to get those that are manufactured appropriately and properly, and they get a bad rap sometimes. People sometimes say, "Oh, supplements, they're garbage." Not Some supplements probably will not help you, but there are supplements that can be profoundly helpful. And again, it goes to the objective criteria in terms of and again, the exercise, the mind, body, all those things can be really helpful to our systems, and they're not part of standard of care.
Right,
It's
right.
shocking. You go to a hospital, and this is somebody who's got cancer, and you'll see on the lunch tray there, chocolate pudding, sugar, sugar. You'll see dairy, sugar. You'll see, maybe a hamburger or sloppy joes. I
Oh,
mean,
oh.
fries. I've seen that in hospitals, and that's gonna take you the wrong way. It's not a good idea.
I know. It's like the cart that they roll around with all these cookies and just it. None of it was healthy, and I remember looking at it, going like, "Why are we eating that? we're fighting cancer, and they're giving us these cookies and these crackers." And yeah, I'm not going to name names, but they're
Yeah,
definitely not healthy.
yeah. I
Um,
should mention two other things. I apologize for
oh, no
interrupting,
worries.
but I forgot to mention. Um, Really important, which goes to the mind body area, which we haven't talked about yet quite, but stress reduction, reducing internal stress, because high stress weakens your immune system. It makes us fragile. It makes us, very nervous. It weakens the immune system. We need a strong immune system to conduct surveillance internally to find the cancer and then go after it with our immune system, our T cells, our B cells, natural killer cells, what's called macrophages. That's part of the immune system. The other thing that's important is social support and surrounding yourself with people who are nurturing people, who are caring
Mm-hmm.
people, and social support is helpful. You really don't want, I don't think you want to have people who call you every day of the week and say, "How you feeling? How you feeling? How you feeling?" all the time. And then you got to repeat the story. You got to revisit your issue and situation. And you just don't want people around you who are going to bring you down. That's really important. Quick story on that. Jean Wallace, also, she's a nutritional expert, and in the book, she her mother had cancer, and her mother had a philosophy and said, "I'm not going to have cancer after 12 noon every day.
Oh,
Up till
yeah.
12 noon, I got to deal with some things, but I've got too many things to do. I've got to go for my hike. I've got to tend my garden. I've got errands to do. I've got friends to visit. I don't have cancer after 12 noon." And she just kind of drew a line in the sand
I love it.
and was not going to think about it after 12 noon, which was an interesting approach.
Yeah, I didn't have cancer anytime my children were around because I didn't tell them. They were too young, and that was my
Oh, okay.
choice. Not that I judge. Everybody should do, what they think is best for their children. But yeah, so whenever they were around, I stepped up, and it actually helped me. I had to get up to go to the games, get up to go to the recitals, get up to go to the birthday parties. Because honestly, Rick, I would have rather just sit in my chemo cave, all cozy, and not go anywhere.
Right.
But that's not a good place to stay. So getting up and getting out, being around people, and when you're going through cancer, most everybody knows that they're supporting you and lifting you up. And I had one friend who texted me or called me or emailed me every single day. And it was not something I ever had to respond to. She just like thinking about you, how you doing, hope you're doing well. And even when she went to France, she would communicate with me, and it was so, I call it a gift for every day. And like, you don't have to answer, but I just know that I'm here, And it was just to know that somebody cares about you, and taking a moment out of your day to lift you up. And when I would go silent for a while, I would be stuck in my chemo cave, and she'd be like, put some clothes on, we're coming over to get you, we're going to go have some tea, and they would come, and literally, and I'd be a mess, like a complete mess. And I'd like put my clothes on, and I was stuck. And they take me out. We go to Starbucks, get some tea. It was like that was like a drug for me. Because it just like healed
Yeah.
me, helped me heal, and it's just a wonderful gift. I'm so blessed to have a wonderful support system. 100%. So we're talking about the treatments and how they're unproven. Is there evidence, real tangible evidence, to support these non-standard care options?
Yeah, and that's a good point. First, short answer is yes, there's a ton of evidence. However, according to standard of care, conventional medicine, the evidence they want to see is something called the gold standard. And what the gold standard means is large randomized studies, placebo controlled, and double blind. And these studies take generally 10 plus years to conduct. Because first, when they do the studies, they start with what's called the cell lines. Then they test it against mice. Then they do a phase one with maybe 30 to 50 people. Phase two could be 50 to 300 people. Phase three might be 300 to 5,000 people. And it takes years and years and years to conduct these studies. And according to the Tufts University Medical School, there was a study of drug approval in 2014. It cost $2.5 billion with a B to do these studies. Now, let's assume they were off, but you can research the study yourself. Let's assume it was $1 billion. Who's got $1 billion to spend? The major pharmaceutical companies, because then they get a patent for 20 years.
Right.
Think about all the TV ads we see today, all the commercials about all the drugs out there. There's a ton of them. So, they can make billions for 20 years and they're protected. So they are pharmaceutically, that's what they do, pharmaceutical medicine. So if it doesn't have a study, which is a gold standard study, a lot of the doctors, most of them will say it's unproven. Well, there's a lot of what's called epidemiological studies, case reports, case studies, clinical evidence, where doctors might say, I'm going to implement these in an integrative doctor in my practice, and it works for my patients. I've been doing it for 15 years. Mm-hmm. It works. I don't need any more proof. So yes, there's a ton of research out there that shows that this stuff works. But a lot of the doctors are not trained in this area. They go with what the FDA says. They don't have most of the schools, 75%, have no nutritional training of any kind in medical school.
It's so strange.
And if they do, it's just a basic generic class. So they know nothing about nutrition. And, it's sad because these other things can be profoundly beneficial to their patients.
I know. It's shocking to me how much they don't know about. Well, not all of them. I don't want to put them in a whole group, but a lot of them just don't know about nutrition. It's kind of shocking. And I think that's why some doctors, like, why do you think they push back? Like, if they think that this could possibly help, why wouldn't they?
They have the American Medical Association. They have certain things and regulations they have to do.
Right.
They can't supposedly propose certain recommendations of therapies unless it meets with the standard of care that's recommended to them. For example, there's something called the NCCN, National Comprehensive Cancer Network, which is a consortium of 27 cancer centers throughout the United States. And they make recommendations to all the oncologists about what kind of treatment and therapies they should bring to the table, they should bring to the patient and implement.
Right.
But they're not going to talk about the things we're talking about that can be very beneficial. They have, their tunnel vision about this is how to treat cancer. And most of them, not all of them, as you said, but most of them will not look outside the box.
I know. So we're going to help them. We're going to help them do that. We're going to help them look outside the box. Why does the FDA, why would they not approve something?
Well, it's not even about not approving something. It's about the fact you can't even get to do a study with the FDA because it's so obscenely expensive.
Expensive, right, right.
And no one's going to spend that money unless you're a multi billionaire and you're going to do it out of the sweetness of your heart. But that
Right.
usually doesn't happen. People want to see a return on investment when they put up that kind of money. But there's no patent that you can get. Using the example we used before about curcumin, you can't patent that. You can start selling curcumin tomorrow. Tomorrow, you don't have to have a patent. Anyone in the world can among these other therapies and treatments. Natural therapies and treatments cannot be patented. So you're not going to go through an FDA study because it costs too much money and there's no ROI, return on investment, and there's no patent that you can get. It's sad.
That's very, very sad. What about chemotherapy? What do you think that it's like, can we alter chemotherapy?
There's several things regarding chemo that I have strong opinions about. I touched on one a few minutes ago when I talked about the selection of drugs and personalizing that selection instead of taking it just off the shelf based on the recommendations of the NCCN, like the Dr. Nagurni approach or the Dr. Wiesenthal approach, testing out your tissue sample and then testing it against a whole combination of chemo. So selecting the chemo drug is important. It's
Right.
personalized and works for you, number one. Number two, there's something called the metronomic approach. And metronomic means much lower doses over a longer period of time. So when you have much lower doses, you don't have the same side effects.
Yeah, yeah.
And the side effects can be terribly harsh. So, and you're still getting chemo and you're going after the cancer cytotoxically, meaning you're attacking the chemo, but it's metronomically. As opposed to blasting away with the big guns, which and sometimes God forbid, but you see an obituary that says died of complications of cancer treatment. That means chemotherapy.
Yeah.
Because the chemo can kill you. I mean, it's the old saying, the cure is worse than the cold. The chemo can bring about and spawn other cancers within your body. It can bring about so many problems. So the metronomic approach is not a bad way to go in many circumstances. And mitigating toxicity. What can we do to mitigate and lessen the harsh side effects? There's several things. One, again, over in the LA area, there's a Dr. Walter Longo, and he's a PhD at the University of Southern California, and he's the patriarch. He is really the person who's driving the research into fasting. What I'm talking about is fasting. I'm not talking about the intermittent fasting that we read about and hear about, but fasting a day or two before you get your chemo, the day of chemo, and a day after. Now, fasting in this regard does not mean you can't have anything at all. You can drink water, you can have light tea, light soup broth, but no hard foods at all. No solid foods at all. But fasting for about 3 days, at least the day before, the day after, the day after, tends to put your healthy cells into dormancy, they kind of go to sleep, but your cancer cells are vulnerable still to the chemo. So the chemo can go after the cancer cells, but it doesn't affect it goes after the cancer cells, but it doesn't affect the healthy cells. So fasting is a really good way to do things. And I've talked to oncologists who implement these. These are, again, open-minded, integrative oncologists who said it works for my clients. And Longo has a lot of research on the web, Walter Longo. Number two is acupuncture. There are some people, anecdotally, but there's a lot of anecdotal evidence that use acupuncture immediately after chemo. And that supposedly can help mitigate the toxic, harsh side effects. So that's another thing to possibly bring to the table if you're getting chemo. And thirdly, certain experts who really know about botanicals and supplements will prescribe certain supplements that will mitigate the toxic effects of chemotherapy as well. So fasting, acupuncture, and supplements, again, brought to the table with experts who will help you in this regard, can mitigate side effects. So there's a better way. There's a place for chemo. If you've got a fast-growing cancer, if it's a dangerous cancer, if it's blocking a vital organ and stopping it from doing its job, there's a place for it, certainly. But I think we overuse chemo and overdose chemo in many cases. It's just my opinion.
I was overdosed the first time. My second chemo, I got typhlitis, which was toxic poisoning from the chemo. Ended up in the hospital for almost 7 days. I couldn't eat. I was so sick, and I'm like, I'm not going to do chemo anymore. I'm done. I'm like, I can't. I was so leveled. I was like, I was just like a wet towel on the floor. I could not function at all. And I changed oncologists. He lowered my level, and it was so much better. I could now manage it, but it was too much, and I kept saying, the first time around, they're like, "Oh, this is what happens with chemo. This is what happens with chemo." I'm like, I can't function. Is that what happens? Yeah, okay, but now it's the second time around. So I completely agree with you. I think that you can alter the chemo to, suit how your body or matches how your body accepts it or not.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of times the philosophy of a lot of people and certain doctors regarding chemo is the more the better. Well, they're not sitting in the chair where you're having that chemo intravenously put into your veins, and it's not necessarily true. So again, as you said, moderating uh, the dosage and bringing other things to the table simultaneously can mitigate the harsh side effects. And we just have to be a little more careful with it instead of just saying, "Oh, chemo for this, that's it. This is the dose." And the selection of the appropriate drugs, we have to look at that more carefully and rethink that, I believe.
Yeah.
Hopefully that will be a thing of the past, a number of years down the road, and we'll look back at chemo and say, were we crazy? That was barbaric.
Yeah.
Why did we give chemo? But we're not quite there yet. Hopefully we'll reach that point in the not too distant
So
future.
true. Okay, so how does one know if they're dealing with like a quack or, an imposter? How do they know that when it comes to integrative, process? Because a lot of the people that are in that world are kind of like, uniquely different. How do they know?
I mean, it's a fair question because there are quacks, imposters, charlatans out there, and it's terrible. I detest those people. I detest those people
Yeah.
who are trying to
Yeah.
take advantage for money, and it's terrible. They exist, and you mentioned earlier, don't go to the internet. There's a lot of junk and garbage in the internet, and there's also some good stuff. But how do you know the difference? It's hard to know. You really have to talk to people, get recommendations. If it sounds like snake oil, it might be snake oil.
Right.
You can find integrative medical doctors, integrative cancer doctors, naturopaths who have degrees in cancer, and specialists who work with them. So you just have to do some homework. But there's actually charlatans. Let's be fair here, on both sides of the fence. In the alternative world, there are. In the conventional world, and I've done the research, there are oncologists who've been convicted in Florida, New Jersey, Michigan. Duke University was caught playing numbers to change the results of a study. This is all online. You can find this. And there were oncologists who brought drugs in from out of the country that were not approved. There was a doctor in Michigan, conventional guy, who was giving chemo to people who didn't have cancer just to make millions and millions of dollars. He's now in prison. So, I mean, I'm not. This is true.
It's horrible.
You can find this. It's horrible. So you have to do your homework about going with somebody, regardless of whether it's someone in the conventional world, the integrative world, or the alternative world, who is highly credible, has reputation, a lot of experience, sophistication, and it's a matter of doing homework. But there's no list that says these people here are all imposters.
Well, I knew there are, you can read reviews, I suppose, but I've met people like, oh yeah, I'm going to go to Mexico. I'm going to stay, and you give them like $10,000. That seems to be like the number, $10,000. I'm like, I don't know if that's a great idea. I would not do that. Yeah. Okay. So beware, everybody, beware. So we talked about, if your doctor tells you to get your affairs in order, don't listen to that. Like, seek out some new options.
Yeah.
Can you give a few examples of people who were given terminal prognosis, who are surviving and thriving many years later? You mentioned some of them. Can you be specific?
Sure. I'll give you two or three, depending on how long we want to talk about that. But I'll give you an example. For example, there's a woman named, and I'll give you names because these people are named in the book.
Yeah, they are. It's amazing. Amazing.
There's a woman named Janet Summer, and Janet lives in Ohio. She was a lifelong nurse, a nurse educator in hospitals in the Cleveland area. She was very active. She was a tennis player. She was an athlete. But she had this chronic nagging cough. And she was coughing one day, hitting with a buddy of hers who happened to be a doctor, and was not her doctor, but he happened to be a doctor.
Mm-hmm.
And she said, "You know what? Can you give me something for this cough?" And he said, "Okay, but before I give you something for your cough, I want you to get an X-ray and just check it out. Maybe you've got bronchitis or pneumonia. Let's just check it out." So she went for an X-ray, and they discovered she had lung cancer, which had metastasized to the pancreas, the stomach, and the liver.
Oh.
This was in 1995, 25 years ago. She went to one specialist at one hospital and said she was told she had 3 to 6 months to live. She didn't like that. She told her son she was going to die. She went for the second opinion to a different hospital, a famous hospital, and was told she had 3 to 6 weeks to live. Weeks to live in 1995. They said that they could do surgery to remove the stomach mass, and they would try one dose of chemo, but they said it would only extend her life maybe a couple of months at most. She did one dose of chemo, and she was not a large woman. Her weight went from 114 pounds to 72 pounds in 3 weeks. 3 weeks, 114 to 72 pounds. I don't need to tell you how dangerous that is. She said, literally, specifically, she said the words, she said, "I look like a concentration camp survivor."
Yeah.
She then went into hospice care. And she went into hospice, and her conventional doctor said, "You know what, Janet, why don't you try an alternative treatment?" And she said, being brought up in a conventional setting, she said, "I can't. It's mere nonsense. It's for hippies." That's what she said.
It's for hippies.
That's what she said. But her sister twisted her arm, and they sought out a macrobiotic counselor in the Cleveland area. So she found this macrobiotic specialist, and she was now in hospice, and she was very, very fortunate. She had tremendous social support. She had 8 very close friends who would make her meals every day, and bring her the macrobiotic food every day. She was in hospice for over 1 year. And at a certain point during the year, she said, "I don't want to have any more scans," because it was slow progress. And but actually, after like 3 or 4 days of the macrobiotic diet, she had stopped. She was vomiting. She stopped that. And she was feeling better, but she still had cancer all over her body. Anyway, down the road she goes about a year later, and she says, "Okay, let's have a scan. Let's just see. It's been a year." And they did scans, and she was slowly gaining back weight, and they couldn't see the cancer. Cancer was gone. It took a year, step by step by step. She changed her internal biochemistry and made it all the way back. So then